welcome to the February USDA Ag Outlook webinar from Progressive Ag. My name is Lynn Baldus, and joining me today is Ray Grabanski, lead analyst and president of Progressive Ag Marketing. Ray, what was in this Ag Outlook and what did we learn from it?
Well, actually, you have to sift through a lot of chaff in the Ag Outlook. They have a lot of presentations, but the one that really matters to grain producers is the one on the grains outlook. And in it, they project acreage for all the major principal crops: wheat, corn, soybeans. They project exports for the coming year. They project the carryout, and most importantly, then, what will the price be for the coming year? This is actually the first major outlook for the coming year, and USDA is actually as good as anyone at predicting it, but they're still their best guesses. The year has to unfold yet, and I've got some, I'd like to highlight their guesses, their best guesses, and then I'll throw some of the changes that I would throw on it as my best guess. And hopefully people will learn a little bit about the outlook for the coming year.
Okay, so what are some of those best guesses, and what's your take on those guesses?
Okay, and first of all, let's just cover corn. In corn, they're projecting 90 million acres, a 2 million acre increase in corn acres. You might ask, well, why would corn acres go up when you're losing 13, 14% margin on it? But USDA said, well, first of all, nitrogen fertilizer costs are down 20% from last year. Second, diesel costs are down 35% from last year. So therefore, they're projecting a 2 million acre increase in corn, and they also know that we already planted 3 or 4 million acres less winter wheat. So won't those acres go to something? And so they basically projected that that would go up. They also said total acres, we're going to have an increase in one more third area, and that is basically pasture fallow. We're going to have a 1.8 million drop in planted acreage of the three principal crops, and most of that will just be unplanted because the price is so bad, the margins are so bad. We talked about that. When prices get so bad, the best cure for low prices is low prices, and what happens? Well, we're projecting a 13 to 15% loss in everything. Let's just plant a little bit less acres. That poor ground, let's just leave it idle this year, and we are seeing some of that.
Okay, so because not only price is down, but inputs are also down, the USDA sees a little bit more corn acreage, but a lot more land comparatively being left unused. That's the USDA's take. What's your take, Ray?
Well, actually, I think maybe that corn acreage might be a little bit too high. There might actually be a little more acres left idle than 1.8, maybe 2.8. So you could drop the corn acres, 1 million, that would be 89 million instead of 90. That's actually still a 1 million acre increase from last year's planted acreage.
Okay.
So that makes more sense to me. So actually, they've got a 168 bushel yield projected. I would drop that just 1 bushel just by saying, you're losing so much money, maybe people will spend a little less on fertilizer, plant a little less expensive varieties, so your production, potentials may be down a little. You see, so low prices cure low prices by forcing farmers to spend less on the crop and plant less. So that drops a million acres from their projection. That's 168 million production. You drop a bushel yield from it, that's 90 million. So maybe you got 260, 270 less production than they're projecting. I would also say maybe there'd be a little more feed, since prices are so cheap, maybe there'd be a little more feed use than they projected an increase of 125 million. I'd say maybe 25 million more. They projected the same amount in ethanol. I would say why not use 75 million more, although energy prices are cheap too. So maybe the ending stocks might be, instead of 1.977 that they're projecting, 140 million more than this current crop year. I would say we might actually be down, 50 to 100, maybe even 150 million. So their price outlook is 345 for the year. That's versus 360 right now. The average cost of production is about 4. So this year they're projecting a 40-cent loss, or 10%. Next year they're projecting a 55-cent loss, or 12, 13, 14%. I would guess that the price will be the same as this past year, or maybe even a dime, 20 cents better.
Okay.
So I think the outlook would be a little better. USDA is projecting a very negative outlook for the 2016-17 year. A 15-cent lower price in corn, an 80-cent lower price in wheat, and a 30-cent lower price in soybeans. I actually would adjust all those numbers and say our outlook is the same or maybe a little better than last year. So, instead of, we lost 40 cents a bushel on corn last year. If you have a $4 cost, maybe we'll actually only lose, 30 or something, 25 or 30. That's the national average price for the year. Of course, right now, futures are projecting a 50-cent loss for the year for most producers, $3.50 cash price versus a $4 cost. And I think as the year goes on, we're making a bottom in the market, the price will actually creep higher. So if you wait to market till the end of the year, you might only lose 10 cents a bushel or, 2 or 3%, something like that.
Okay.
I'm optimistic. I think prices will get better. USDA gave a pretty negative outlook, and I would adjust those down. They're still just wild guesses because a lot has to unfold in the year. We're all projecting trend yields. Well, we could get a big crop like we did last year or the year before, or we could have a disastrous crop like we did in 2012. And so all bets are off, depending on the weather, of course.
Okay. So kind of take-home news, the USDA is negative, you are less negative, and there's a lot we still don't know.
Yeah, USDA says we'll lose 10% margin on all of our crops, which is a terrible outlook, really. And they say the price outlook's worse than last year. I would say the price outlook is the same as last year. Maybe we'll only lose maybe 5%. Or, if you're a great marketer, maybe you'll even break even. So hopefully we can be great marketers this year.
All right, that's the challenge. So I know Progressive Ag, you're a lawyer, you started a law firm. You're also looking at a couple other issues, including the Ark County payments or lack thereof. What updates do you have for us on that?
Well, we had meetings across North Dakota this week, and we basically had a legal contract where we represent them in a limited capacity, basically in a lobbying and political capacity. But we are signing up farmers to represent them as their attorneys. So we are trying to get from those farmers information. For instance, RMA assigned a yield of 165 for Lemoore County for this year because they didn't have NASS data. Well, that's kind of odd because for 33 years before that, NASS was able to supply us a yield for Lemoore County for 33 straight years. All of a sudden, there's some new procedure in 2014 that requires them to do some survey, and we have to have 7% of the surveys back or 25% of the acres in order to report it. I bet NASS has a yield estimate for Lemoore County, but they can't release it because under the new administrative procedures, they're not supposed to. You've done some research on this issue. I think just yesterday you talked with some NASS people and you have an idea.
Yeah, so part of what I've been looking at is how NASS has gone about calculating the yields, what's changed, why is it more of a recent trend that counties aren't reporting their own yields through the NASS surveys. And NASS collects its data primarily through these surveys. They send it out, they want a statistically significant response rate, because otherwise they could have the one really good farmer in a county respond and it sets the yield too high for everyone else, or they could have kind of the Joe below average respond and then really drag everyone's yields down. So they want a good base of people within a county to respond and get those surveys in so they can have a semi-accurate yield. Mm-hmm. I talked to them about the procedure, why these surveys might be failing more often. Most of their surveys are still returned by mail. They follow up with phone calls and some computer-assisted phone calls, which I believe might just be some sort of telemarketing thing, or when you talk to a computer. And so through that process, I try to figure out why aren't some of these surveys being returned. And it seems to be a trend in a lot of places. Counties, farmers in these counties aren't returning their surveys, therefore causing these surveys to fail. And then when they have to calculate the average county yield for this ARC code data, they have to go to alternative data sources like the RMA yields you were talking about. Which,
yeah, but so they did it 33 years in Lemoore. Mm-hmm. And farmers have said to me that they actually were surveyed more this year because supposedly half of the farmers got a survey, which is kind of a misnomer, because half of the registered at FSA got a survey. One of the legislators yesterday from Lemoore County said, "Okay, I have 7 landlords, and they have a share on mine, and so they're registered too." So 7 landlords, some of them in Arizona, and him, the operator. So does that count as 8 surveys? So they sent 8 surveys out. None of those landlords even know what it is. They're in Arizona. They throw it away. Maybe Mike was the only one that filled it out. So that's only 1/8 of the surveys. But actually, there's only one active farmer in that whole group of 8.
So it's more important to focus on the operator than necessarily who owns the land, because they might be in Arizona golfing.
But their computer-generated thing out of FSA's system sends it to all 8, and they say only 1 out of 8 responded. That's too low. We won't report that. You see what I'm saying? Is that really the proper way to do it? And second of all, so this year, what was different about 2014? I thought it was actually more surveys sent out. And how many surveys did they get? 7% of the surveys back the previous 33 years? And did they get 25% of the acreage back the previous 33 years when they released it? So why was it different in 14? They didn't release a yield, and therefore the only year that it actually counted on their ARCO payment, on their farm bill payments, the previous years it didn't matter. Why all of a sudden did they not release it in 14 when it mattered? That's a question I'd like someone from FSA to answer.
And that is something, Progressive Ag and our partners are trying to get down to the issue. Now, you mentioned the legislative lobbying efforts. You were having farmers sign contracts with us so we can help them in this. Can you give us some details on the scope of the representation and what the end game is? If everything goes the way we want, what do we want to see happen?
Well, we want to see the administration, from what I understand, it's not a state FSA decision that denied farmers their correct payments. In fact, there were even some requests, from what I understood, from the state FSA office and farmers affected that the federal USDA officials, Secretary Vilsack, for example, correct it and pay the farmers the $15 million that they think they were denied. But from what I understand, the administration said no, and they have political pressures from groups like the Environmental Working Group saying, do not pay those farmers any more money. They got plenty. So that kind of, I don't know all the details, but from what I've heard, rumors and innuendo, that kind of sounds like that's maybe true. So what we want to do is have farmers sign up. If we get 50,000 farmers sign up, if we have 70% of Lemoore County farmers sign up to represent them in a political and lobbying capacity. So for instance, they release all their crop insurance records to us. RMA assigned yield was 165. I've heard some problems with that RMA data. It's not all your crop insurance data. Crop insurance losses are thrown out. Crop insurance claims are thrown out. It's not even a complete sample. So if we get 70% of the farmers releasing their data to us, some of the crop insurance companies have said, one of the companies is probably 1/3 of the business in that whole county. They said, if you get releases from them, we will calculate the total acres, the total bushels reported, and the yield. So if we have 30% of the farmers that give us that, they'll calculate it and sign off saying this is correct. Okay. We checked it 3 times. If that yield is 151, for example, and RMA assigned 165, we just proved that the RMA yield is wrong, right? And therefore, if the RMA yield is wrong and we prove it, why don't you correct it down to the 151 and pay those guys the money they're entitled to?
Okay, so by using the insurance data, those are correct numbers through the insurance company, and by getting the release, we allow the insurance company to take all these different farmers' information, quote unquote, release it and allow, not individualized, but just as a group, so we can see what the average yield is.
Well, I would say though, one thing, in North Dakota, that will be pretty good data because most of the farmers buy up crop insurance, and therefore, and most of them are big enough where they have the potential to get audited if they have over $100,000 claim. Now at $200,000, it changed to $200,000 in 2013. Okay. But some of this data goes back to 2009, of course. The base years. So you have to remember that. Second of all, in a state like Iowa, Illinois, or Indiana, where there was a lot of cat insurance sold, those guys that buy cat will never ever have a claim, especially if they farm over 1,000 acres in a county, because it's all one unit. So they know we'll never have a claim. Therefore, they can buy CAT and report their yields, and they know they'll never get audited. And besides that, they never really wanted insurance. Their crop insurance agent talked them into it. So they just sign a form, and I'm not sure how this is done, but I suspect, I've seen some of those CAT yields, and they're not right. They're wrong. If the RMA assumes they're right, then that's an error. So let's say, for example, in a county in Iowa, 50% of the farmers bought CAT. The average yield of those farmers was actually 162. But let's say they didn't care. They just told the guy, barroom talk, it yielded 190 for average. So they reported 190 on their CAT. That's not auditable. It's supposedly auditable if they have over 200,000 claim. No one ever, ever, ever has a $200,000 claim on CAT, ever. Okay. So they'll never get audited, so they report 190, and RMA assumes, the RMA is bean counters, they're not statisticians. They assume that those numbers are right, and therefore they report 165 for Lemoore County, for example. That's obviously wrong, and everyone in the county knows it's wrong, but the RMA bean counters say, oh no, it's right, because we've run it out of our computers. But they forgot that the CAT guys are not auditable, and they don't care about their yields when they report them. And so, the assumption that RMA data is right is a false assumption, especially for states that have a lot of CAT.
Okay. I want to turn now a little bit to, we're going to put on the screen this corn map for North Dakota so people at home can see kind of what got affected, where the payments were. The counties we've been talking about most are Logan and Lemoore. They're in gray. They're the people who didn't get any payments, which, because their yields look strangely high.
Well, they were assigned an orange yield, an RMA yield, because there supposedly wasn't enough NAS data. But their base was an apple yield, which was NAS yields, which was assigned the previous 5 years. So they started with apples, they switched to oranges, which everybody knows is 10 bushel too high across the state. And people are saying that the RMA yield is 15 bushel too high in Lemoore. So they got zero payment, and all of the counties around them, like Barnes got $50, Stutzman got 61, Kidder got 50, Dickey got 41, Sargent got 65, Richland, Richland got 69. I mean, they got nothing. Their neighbors got $50 to $70, and they're mad, and they should be.
Yeah, because that's $50 to $70 per acre in a down year and a tough year for farming.
Yeah, and it might be the difference with some young farmers out there, whether they get a loan for next year or don't get a loan from their bank.
Okay, so what we want people to keep in mind is Progressive Ag's working on this issue. We've partnered with some other law firms to help us with this. We're doing it on a pro bono basis, which means we're not charging you. We're pursuing a legislative lobbying strategy so we can get this changed, so we can get these payments correct, and for the life of this farm bill till 2018, get the system right, get it working, so next year we don't have the problem, the following year we don't have this problem, and we can get everything working correctly.
It's a 5-year farm bill, so we've only had 1 year where we're noticing all these inconsistencies and, if you want to call it arbitrary and capricious numbers. And so this is just the first year. So, 8 counties in North Dakota, we know were assigned RMA yields, an orange, when they were started with an apple. And we think they lost $15 million. But here's another question. How do we know that, for example, Cass County got $59 an acre? How do we know that shouldn't have been 62? How do we know that? James Lee nails me down on this, and he is a brilliant lawyer. He says, Ray, as an attorney now, you have to make sure you leave no stone unturned. So if you're 95% sure that Cass County should have got $59, don't say you're sure. Make sure you check all of those 5 years of base numbers. Make sure all of them are NAS yields. Because Chris Clayton of DTN says 57% of all of the counties in the United States do not have consistent NAS yields for the base and NAS yields for harvest. 43% in the country have that consistency. 57% do not, which means 57% of all the other counties in North Dakota may have something different. And it may be they got the max payment, but maybe it's $1 or $2 less than it should have been.
Maybe the max payment is not as high as it otherwise could have been, because in the base of apples, there's a couple oranges tossed in there, screwing up the data set.
Or vice versa. So the point is, we're just discovering, you're doing most of the research on it, Lynn. And the more we do research on every stone we unturn, it seems, we find a little more, it's a little smelly under that stone. It's something is not right. One of the producers yesterday in, I believe it was in Napoleon, said, well, I have silage. And silage, they do a conversion factor of silage to grain. And if they've done that in the past, 25% of the county is chopped. And those silage yields are high, and the grain yield is high. Did they raise that in the base, or did they leave it just the grain yield? So there's a lot of other questions that are popping up. The more we look at it, the more this thing needs to be looked at. And quite honestly, if we represent farmers, then it's probably worth our time to look at it. But if we don't have farmers in, say, Cass County sign up, why would we want to, we have no reason to uncover those stones. We need to concentrate on the stones where we actually are representing farmers.
And so it's important for farmers to get involved. Where should they go for more information? Where should they go to follow up with us and be able to engage with us?
Well, fixthefarmsubsidy.com is a website that specifically focuses on ARCO. But our website, progressiveaglaw.com, has all of that information as well. And they can contact any of our attorneys or staff. And, we've got those contracts, I believe, posted online too. So we need people to sign those contracts and represent them. And then we need their name, cell phone, email address. And then once we organize our efforts, we can ask them to release their crop insurance data, and we can start doing the data collection we need in order to provide evidence, solid numbers, not just some, crazy so-called RMA yield that isn't actually all of your crop insurance records in the county anyway.
All right, so it's important for farmers to get involved. It's important to contact us, and feel free to call us. We'll answer any questions you have. Now I want to turn to something else Progressive Ag Law is working on. It's the Syngenta case. I know farmers have heard a lot about it. They've heard that Syngenta released a variety in an inappropriate fashion. It caused China to begin to start rejecting American corn imports. And when you reduce our demand for corn by 1 China's worth, that has an effect. The National Grain and Feed Association estimates 11 to 50 cents per bushel for the 2013 crop year alone. Farmers have heard a lot of this stuff before. As you can see, I can just come up with it off the top of my head. It's pretty well-known information. What's new? Why should farmers pay attention now? Why should they engage with us if they haven't engaged with us to this point?
Well, first of all, I have to say, farmers, as a rule, do not like lawyers. Both you and I are lawyers.
I'll take
now.
that personally.
Both you and I are lawyers. And actually, I've heard a lot of good lawyer jokes since I became an attorney 2 years ago. I worked with farmers for 30 years. It's been a blessing to do that. Farmers are honest, hardworking people. They don't want to be in court. They don't want to have a lawyer. They don't want to have to represent and sue someone, especially someone they might consider a partner, like the seed company that sells them the seed. But on the other hand, some of those lawyer jokes are good. Like, what do you call a busload of lawyers at the bottom of the ocean?
I don't know what.
A good start?
Oh, yeah.
or how do you know when a lawyer's lying?
I don't know how.
His lips are moving.
Oh, my God.
So these are great jokes. And it does say farmers do not they don't want to have to hire lawyers. And it's a net loss and cost. But we're working on this ARCO case pro bono. So that means one of the farmers at the meeting said, I had to look up what that means because it's lawyer talk, but what it means is for free. In other words, in our law, our bar encourages us to do some pro bono work. I remind our national litigators that too. And they've said we will do it. And these guys are top lawyers in the country, I think. Well, I might be biased. But anyway, my point is, so we're working on the ARCO case pro bono. Maybe USDA underpaid them 10%, maybe 5, maybe 2, maybe 20. So, but 10% of $4.5 billion is $450 million. Farmers think that's a pretty big number. Maybe we should go after it. And let me make another point. So if the farmer only paid 90% of his fertilizer bill, do you think the farmer could just say, well, 90% is pretty good, that's good enough for you? What do you think the fertilizer dealer is going to say?
I think they're going to send a bill, and they know where they're at, and they're going to come for it.
They expect to be paid the last 10%. Should farmers be any different, with their ARCO payments? If they were promised 100% and they're only paid 90, shouldn't they be upset about it? Certainly in Lemoore and Logan County, they were paid 0. So some farmers are very upset. The second point I wanted to make is, so if the farmer said to the IRS, oh yeah, I owe you $40,000, but I think I'll just pay you 36, 90% of it. That should be good enough for you, IRS. What's the IRS government going to say?
Oh, they're going to take every penny.
I had a law professor that said, one thing you need to learn, Ray, no matter if whoever's secured in front of anybody, the IRS, he said, remember this, the IRS always gets their share of flesh. In other words, the IRS jumps in front of anyone secured and gets paid. So they will do that before the fertilizer dealer, before the bank, before anyone, they will get paid. My point is, farmers, are they going to accept, well, 90% is good enough, and we tried administratively to request them to fix it. We went through our legislators and asked them, our senators and representatives, to try and fix it. They couldn't fix it politically. The administration, Secretary Vilsack, wouldn't pay them. So if you don't do something, you're going to probably get nothing. Then 90% is good enough for you, right?
And if you don't speak out, you're not heard. And in this issue with the pro bono representation, I think that goes a long way to help show farmers that we're really trying to help them in this matter. And on the Syngenta litigation, a lot of the resistance we've been running into are people, like you said, not wanting to go against someone who's on their team, like they see Syngenta as. And I think it's important for farmers to know in that issue in particular that it's not a lawsuit brought out of ill will. It's not trying to drive anyone bankrupt. It's just trying to settle up for the money that Syngenta's actions cost farmers. And we are bringing it on a contingency fee basis, which for farmers, it's not quite pro bono. Could you explain the differences there?
Yeah, I will. And in fact, let me make another point. When I first took the torts class in law school, I was 48 when I started law school, and I did not have a favorable impression of torts lawyers because they're suing to collect money, and they're just out for themselves, whatever. But actually, in the torts class, I was surprised to learn, the professor said, the law is actually, it doesn't say that you can, torts is set up so that you can just get money you aren't entitled to. The law is set up so that you only get made whole because somebody wronged you and it caused damages. So for example, in the Syngenta case, farmers can't sue for more than, let's say they were damaged 50 cents and the professors and the experts prove that it's 50 cents and the jury agrees. So it's 50 cents. So you were wrong 50 cents. You can't sue for $1. But shouldn't Syngenta pay the 50 cents? And maybe, Cargill, Bunge, or whoever brought it into China, maybe they might have some culpability. Shouldn't they pay the 50 cents that they damaged the farmers? Because after all, they did something wrong. They released the variety before it was approved by China. So, I had a bad impression of torts. But now I understand that in tort law, you're only entitled to get back the amount that you were damaged. So let's say my daughter got hurt by a drunk driver and it paralyzed her, and now she has extra costs her whole life. Well, shouldn't she be entitled to get the damages that were caused and the extra costs or should I have to pay for it for the drunk driver who hit her? That's a different perspective than torts and lawyers. Now all of a sudden the lawyer's the hero because he gets my daughter what she's entitled to because she has to go through that. That's a big deal. So what are we working for in Syngenta? We're trying to recover the damages, the losses that farmers suffered from their irresponsible corporate behavior. Let me remind farmers this: if it's 50 cents a bushel, we raised 13 billion bushels of corn last year. Well, that's $6.5 billion. Okay, 6.5 billion. Let's put this in proper context. The ARCO issue is a $450 million issue, maybe if it's 10% underpayment. The Syngenta is $6.5 billion. Do the math, Lynn. You were a law student, but do the math. 450 million, 6.5 billion. 6.5 billion is almost like 14 times larger.
Yeah.
The Syngenta case. So if you're a farmer and you sue for you got shorted $20,000 on your ARCO payments, and you raise that much corn in North Dakota, actually your Syngenta claim might be $300,000.
So it could be a much bigger deal for a farmer, and
14 times bigger.
And again, as you said, it's just settling up. It's just trying to make the farmer whole for losing that export market, which caused the prices to go down. And as you mentioned before, we've partnered with some very accomplished attorneys down in Texas, and I think we have a little bit of a commercial we're going to play from right now from our friends over at Phipps, Anderson, and Deacon. So enjoy that.
My name is Martin Phipps, and I am from the great big town of Breckenridge, Texas. I grew up in a town I like to tell people had 3 stoplights. Those values you bring from a small town, being honest, telling the truth, and standing up and believing in something, is something that we do here at our firm.
I'm Barry Deacon. I'm originally from Arkansas, grew up in a family law firm. Farming's been a big part of my professional life in representing farmers and agricultural related entities my entire practice.
You may ask why hire Phipps, Anderson, and Deacon. The best answer I give you is because we are so proud to represent farmers that it's the most important thing when you walk into our building and see what we do.
Part of my background was being involved in representing a co-op of rice farmers against bare crop science in the rice litigation that began in 2006. With my background in the rice litigation, that's important because that was genetically modified rice that was being experimentally tested that contaminated the U.S. rice crops. That litigation is very, very similar to the Syngenta corn litigation where an unapproved trait was marketed to China.
What you're going to find out in this case is when Syngenta released Viptera to sell to you, they hadn't even applied to China for approval. Because of that, they took a risk, and that risk ended with you losing the China market. When you're choosing a lawyer to represent you in the Syngenta litigation, every lawyer is going to tell you that they're the best. We don't have to say anything to you. We just want you to look at our record. We are the lawyers who tried and won the rice case. We're the lawyers that developed the damage models. We're the lawyers that got the punitive damage verdicts. The rice case settled for $750 million. I'm very proud to tell you that my farmers, the people that I represented, got $50 million more than everybody else. We get asked every day, is this going to be a class action? And I want to make the answer real clear. We're not class action lawyers. We represent individual farmers against Syngenta and other big companies. And why do we do that? Because class actions don't help the clients. They only help the lawyers. Each one of you farm differently. Each one of your damages are different. So what we believe is we're going to represent you individually and not like some class action lawyer.
We are certainly not against the technology that Syngenta has come up with in producing their seed. We're actually for that technology because it's good for the American farmer. What we have a fault with is what Syngenta has done in marketing its corn. It's done it in an irresponsible way, and that has affected all of us.
I don't know about you, but we need more places to sell our corn, not less. And so all we're asking Syngenta to do is to stand up and do the right thing. The same thing you do every day when anybody comes to you with an issue. You may ask what makes us different at Phipps, Anderson, Deacon. The answer is simple, is we care. I've been on a combine and I know how hard it is to farm. And because I'm gonna make sure when I get done with this case and I come and sit in your living room, that you're proud that I'm your lawyer.
We are handling these cases on a contingency fee basis, which means we will not get paid unless we successfully try or settle the lawsuit, and we will pay all the costs of litigation out of our end. We believe in this case, and that's why we're putting our money where our mouth is. That'll do it for us here in Fargo. Remember, you can catch all of our webinars on our website at progressiveaglaw.com, and while you're there, you can learn more about the Syngenta and ARTCO matters as well. Thank you so much for watching, and catch us next time.